Hello Fight Fam, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to the MMA Girl channel on YouTube. I am Jess, of course, the MMA Girl. We're going to be talking about UFC 322, of course, which happened just Saturday the 15th of November, and there's a lot to unpack about this card, and I can't wait to talk about all of this stuff. I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the card overall, so of course we're going to go over everything, and let me know, you guys, what you thought of UFC 322 in the comments down below. Let's go. So, about the early prelims card, we had a few finishes on this fight card, of course, before we got the main card. And first finish on the list is, of course, Beysangour Susakayev. Susakayev, of course, as I said in my last video, is Hamza Chimaev's training partner, and he is also, it's been revealed, trained with Nassourdine Imavov, also a middleweight in the UFC's middleweight division, and the next contender for the UFC middleweight belt against Hamza, if all things go to plan for him. So, of course, as I said in my last video, Beysangour was gonna probably light up the arena and get the win here via finish, and he almost didn't. I thought this was gonna go to a decision. Of course, he would have won via UD, but I didn't see him winning that first round. I feel like his nonchalance and his attitude, I wasn't impressed by his nonchalance, but I feel like it was a little bit too, I know I'm gonna win, I'm not even gonna make an effort to put myself in the right place to start this fight, because obviously, if you guys see, at the start of the fight, he was up against the cage walls and slouching a bit like, meh, this is really walking apart. I couldn't be bothered to be here. Like, dude, this is the UFC. This is your biggest opportunity in the whole world to impress the bosses, to stay on the UFC roster. Don't have an attitude like that for your second fight in the UFC. I find that completely ridiculous. Great finish, of course, from him. Third round TKO. But of course, he almost didn't get it because of his attitude. If he'd have done this correctly and started from the beginning of the fight, taking it seriously from head to toe, he wouldn't have got the third round KO. He would have got maybe a first or second round KO. Because I think he hugely underestimated Makhachev. He's not a bad fighter. Makhachev is a great fighter. Please, Beysangour, don't underestimate your opponents, because this may not be the same every time. If you underestimate every one of your opponents in the UFC, there won't be Eric Makhachevs for every single fight that you have in the UFC. You're going to have to work your way up the rankings and take some of these fighters seriously. Even though this is your second fight in the UFC, so down, dude. Great fight, but could have been better. Obviously, he stays undefeated, Beysangour, at 11-0. Very happy for him, but of course, the attitude needs to hit the road. Last finish on the early prelims card was, of course, Gerald Meerschaft versus Kyle Daukaus. Of course, I said in my last video, this fight, there will definitely be someone finishing someone, and this time around it was Kyle Daukaus finishing Meerschaft. Of course, Meerschaft nearing the end of his career. Kyle Daukaus, of course, only came to UFC under 5 years ago and is now, of course, working his way up the middleweight rankings. So his win against Meerschaft via first round submission is very impressive, and I'm sure he impressed the UFC bosses at UFC 322, so I hope to see him again very soon. So this time around, Malcom Wellmaker, he was supposed to be taking on Cody Haddon, but unfortunately Cody Haddon had to pull out this fight, and at the last minute they called in Ethwin Ewing, who of course was coming in on 48 hours notice, who was not originally in the UFC to begin with. This was his first UFC fight. He was last seen at A1 Combat and has been also seen at LFA previously in his MMA career, and he was called last minute to replace Haddon to save the card, basically. They could have gone without this fight as well because it wasn't a main card fight, but anyway, they tried to replace Wellmaker's opponent because I think the UFC were trying to push Wellmaker because he was the UFC's young bantamweight prospect. But unfortunately, coming in on 2 days notice, Ewing beat Wellmaker via unanimous decision, and a lot of people are saying, of course, fraud check. I'm not going to say fraud check, but it is kind of bad. It looks kind of bad because Wellmaker's, he was the prospect that everyone was so excited about. He's in bantamweight, so he was talking about maybe one day challenging for the belt against Merab, blah, 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 blah. Of course, the UFC were backing him up as much as he was backing himself up. They were trying to push him as far as possible, which is why I think they wanted to replace his opponent absolutely 100%, because they wanted him to be able to display his goods on the screen at UFC 322 and probably get that 50k bonus for a lovely finish. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The whole fight was just completely underwhelming. Of course, Ewing came in on short notice, so if he was a little rusty, that was not a problem. But in the end, you could almost say that that was the other way around, that Wellmaker was the one coming in 48 hours notice, a little rusty, a little tired, and that Ewing was just so into getting this fight finished. And of course, getting those jabs in, getting those 1-2s. He landed a total of 99 strikes and 85 significant strikes. Can you believe that? On someone like Wellmaker, who was knocking out every one of his opponents when he got to the UFC, this is crazy to me. And of course, the takedowns mean a lot. Wellmaker tried to get 3 takedowns. He attempted 3, got none. And his opponent, Ewing, tried 5 takedowns and got 3. So that makes the whole difference for the judges. He, of course, used his ground game, took his opponent down, got some control time, and was a better striker on the day. And that is just it. That is it. Ewing, welcome to the UFC. I hope the UFC keep you on their roster. And Wellmaker, of course, needs to go back to the drawing board with a few things, because it's been an easy, slow ride for him up until now. And I think that he needs to have a reality check. Not that he's a bad fighter, just, of course, he needs to get back into the swing of things and do things correctly in order to not have another embarrassing evening like that. Because, of course, even though you're the prospect and you can lose at some point, which is completely fine, you can't really afford to lose to someone who is coming in a 48 hours notice and has never fought for the UFC in their lives. This is UFC level fighting, and Ewing came in and showed you what it was like to fight someone. That's no good. Sorry. Next up, we had Blanchfield taking on Tracy Cortez. And of course, as I said in my last video, I wasn't saying that Tracy was going to lose. I didn't say my pick for that one because I only do main card picks on my videos. But when I talked about this fight, I said, I'm not saying that Tracy is sure to lose this fight, but this is going to be a hard fight for her because Blanchfield is very hard to beat. And as we saw on the night, Blanchfield was too hard for Tracy Cortez to beat. I think that she's never came across competition like Blanchfield. And to get the second round submission over Tracy Cortez, very impressive, very nice to see. Beautiful rear naked choke. I think Tracy Cortez has some holes in her game, which is not something that's surprising us. She's a huge fan favorite, but she has a few things missing in her game. I think Tracy's a good workhorse. She'll go back to the gym straight away. I'm sure she went back to the gym this morning and got the work done and is starting up a new training routine to get back in it and get on that ground game, because she needs to improve a few things before going back into the cage. But it was a great fight to see from the girls, and Blanchfield, congratulations, of course, having not fought for the whole of the year 2025. I'm sure she's very happy to end the year with a victory like this. Next up, we had Bo Nikal coming back after his defeat against RDR, and he was facing Rodolfo Vieira. Of course, he was a fan favorite and a big favorite in this fight in terms of betting on, and no one could have predicted that he lose this fight. A few people thought he may get forward checked again. He did not. He's 8-1 now in his professional record in MMA. Nearing towards the end of the fight, I thought he wouldn't get the KO victory because a lot of people, of course, were expecting him to KO in the first or second round, or at least get a submission, which is what he's best at. But he has said in his post-fight interview that he's been working on his striking a lot. He talked to Jorge Masvidal and said, I've been working on my striking a lot and I'm really feeling like I'm improving my striking. And that headshot dead head kick a la Leon Edwards, beautiful finish, and wasn't expecting it from the third round. I thought going into the third that this would just be UD for Bo Nikal, but he knew, and I think that's what he was saying to himself whilst fighting, he knew that he had to get a finish here to get back in those good books with the UFC, and he did indeed. And he, of course, made up one out of the 4 people that got 50k bonuses on this fight card, and the only prelim fighter that got a 50k bonus, because, of course, the finishes on the main card were spectacular. So well done, Bo Nikal. Welcome back to the UFC. Stay here and get better and be humble. And I think he does seem so much more humble than he used to be. He looked really humble. He seemed really humble, and I'm very happy to see that. Now, let's get on to the main card and what we thought of the main card fights and how they ended. Well, for the first 3 fights, all I have to say is wow. Of course, I got a lot of my picks wrong. But of course, Beneil Dariush versus Benoît Saint-Denis, I predicted correctly that Benoît would get the win here. He got a win in the first round. I predicted the third, or maybe a UD. He got it done in 16 seconds. Who'd have thunked it? 16 seconds of action to get that win. And right at the start of the fight, the bell rung, it was full blast action. Of course, Benoît Saint-Denis is very energetic, very agile, and he's very quick on the feet. So he likes to get things done quite quickly, and sometimes that can come to his disadvantage. But this time around, with Beneil Dariush being a little bit slower, a little bit older, he was too overwhelmed by Benoît Saint-Denis' energy and his agility and his speed, and of course didn't see the KO coming. Beautiful work from Benoît. 16 seconds of work, which means, of course, he's fresh. He's still in a good shape. He can maybe come back in January for the new Paramount Plus fight cards that are going to be happening, of course, from January the 1st, 2026, or maybe later on in the year. But I think, as we know Benoît, as we know, he's a very work savvy guy. He wants to get those fights in. He doesn't want to retire too late in his life. So I think that getting wins like this help him get new fights scheduled as soon as possible, and I think the UFC are probably very happy to have bet on him and won, because of course they put him on the main card by replacing Bo Nikal versus Vieira on the prelim card. So I'm very happy that Benoît got onto the main card. Obviously it was the first fight on the main card, and he lit up Madison Square Garden on Saturday night, and he did exactly what the UFC would have wanted him to do. Poor Dariush, of course, but there's always a winner and there's always a loser, guys. Next up, we had Leon Edwards versus Carlos Prates, the fighting nerd, and I predicted that Leon Edwards, being an elite striker from the UK, would win that fight. I underestimated Carlos Prates. I don't really know why. I just didn't think an elite striker like Leon Edwards would lose a fight against Carlos Prates. I thought that Carlos Prates was a little bit too sloppy, a little bit too go in there and do what you can. But unfortunately for Leon, Carlos Prates came prepared and ready. And I think that Carlos Prates knows when to step up and take things seriously when it needs to be taken seriously. I don't think he's someone who will have this image that I smoke, I drink, I party, and I'm actually like that in real life, even when it comes to my training. I think there's someone who has got several vices in his life, but he is able to manage his vices in order for that not to affect his professional work. And apart from his fight against Ian Gary, which of course, bravo Ian Gary, we can now say that you are much tougher than we thought you were, even though of course Ian Gary never underestimated him. But of course, seeing as everyone that's come across Carlos Prates apart from Ian Gary has gotten knocked out, you must give it to Ian Gary now. And of course, Leon Edwards, sorry babe, but you're not going to be able to fight Ian Gary next, because of course Leon would have wanted to fight Ian Gary after winning against Carlos Prates and eventually next year challenge for the title, which unfortunately won't be happening now. And a lot of the questions that have been asked after the UFC wrapped up UFC 322 is what will Leon do? What's going to happen to Leon? And I honestly don't really know what the UFC are going to be able to do with Leon now. And people were joking saying, give him to Buckley. That's the only thing we can do now. Leon Edwards versus Buckley. Lose fight over fight over fight and then face Buckley and win. Maybe he will. But then that would be a shame for Buckley to only face older former champions that are on a losing streak to then either lose or win to them. If Leon Edwards faces Buckley next and he wins against Buckley, then he'll obviously feel better about himself, but he'll do exactly what Kamaru Usman has already done. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying we need to come up with new ideas for Leon Edwards. Carlos Prates post-fight, of course, said that he's been working a hell of a lot with Caio Borralho, of course, his training partner from the Fighting Nerds. And he says that Caio Borralho is constantly on my back, hitting me, and he's much bigger, much larger, and much stronger than Leon Edwards. So I'm so used to it now that any smaller welterweight that does that to me, it is not a problem at all. Well done, Carlos Prates, for the second round KO over Leon Edwards, former champion of the welterweight division. Now what's next for Carlos Prates? Of course, we're going to be looking at probably a fight against Michael Morales, or maybe wait it out until the fights between the champion and the next opponent is going to happen. We don't know who the next number one contender really is, apart from if you want to say Michael Morales is the number one contender, then of course Carlos Prates needs to see if he can fight someone else, maybe rematch against Ian Gary if the UFC want to do that. But he's got a lot of options now. He's got a lot of open options to go with. Next up we had Sean Brady versus Michael Morales. Unfortunately for Michael Morales, joking. Unfortunately for Sean Brady, he did not get the job done as I thought he would, because I said, of course, that Sean Brady would win this fight. And I'm not saying that Michael Morales is a lesser fighter than Leon Edwards, because of course he proved that today, that he is much better than Leon Edwards. We can't really compare these two because they've not got the same fighting style and they're not the same age. They're not in the same stage of their careers. And Michael Morales is undoubtedly insane. He is a monster. He's a beast, and we cannot underestimate this man. I, of course, thought he would lose. He was not the favorite in this fight because, of course, Sean Brady was tearing it up in the UFC. The only fight he lost was against Bilal Muhammad via KO. And the rest of the time he's been in the UFC, he's only been dogging it out and winning his fights. Of course, we last saw him in March win against Leon Edwards via submission in the 4th round. So, of course, I thought that he would win again. I thought he'd take Michael Morales down and finish him as quickly as possible. But Michael Morales, when you look at him physically, he is a big man. He is a beast. And I think he was too overwhelming for Sean Brady. I think Sean Brady got overwhelmed by his size and his power. Wasn't able to take him down at all. Let me see the stats. Let me have a look. Yeah, he tried once to take him down. Didn't manage it. And after 3 minutes of the first round, he got KO'd brutally. And that is really sad to see because, of course, Sean Brady's an elite fighter, and he just needs to work on that striking because his ground game is top notch. Even Islam Makhachev himself said, nah, Sean Brady does not need to come to Dagestan for 2 or 3 years because he is already at the top of his wrestling, and he just needs to work on his striking because there's not a fixed rule that if you come across a striker that's bigger than you, then you'll lose the fight via KO. You just need to know how to dodge his striking and gauge that distance because, of course, he has the height disadvantage and the reach disadvantage. But unfortunately, this time around, Sean Brady did not get the win here, and it just goes to show Sean Brady is a stud. He didn't want to stay out and wait it out for a title shot, even though we promised him a title shot. He didn't want to wait out and on the sidelines. He wanted to fight, and he could have waited out and waited for Islam Makhachev to be handed to him on a silver platter. But he said to himself, no, I want to fight in the meantime, and I don't care who you give it to me. So they obviously proposed Morales to him. He said, yeah, let's do it. He did not expect, of course, to lose this fight. No one did. Or a lot of people did, but of course, no one in his circle of friends and even some of the fans, including myself, didn't think he'd lose lose this fight, but he did. And unfortunately now, I think it'll be a shame not to see him against Islam Makhachev, because having seen, of course, Islam Makhachev's performance at UFC 322, we know now that we need a insanely good grappler to go into the cage with Islam for even it to be competitive. But we'll get into that later on. Let's get into the co-main event of the evening. We had, of course, Valentina Shevchenko defending her flyweight belt against the new flyweight contender, Weili. Zhang, of course, coming up from strawweight, having abandoned her belt to challenge for a belt in a higher up division. Now, I don't have much to say about this fight because it was just total domination from Valentina Shevchenko. I did not expect that Weili Zhang would be that overwhelmed by the pressure of maybe winning this belt, coming up, being embarrassed to come up and then lose, and also have someone in front of her like Valentina Shevchenko, who is very probably intimidating when you're in front of her in a cage, just you and her and the ref locked in there. And I think that she didn't seem as dominating and as confident as she usually did. And of course, you know, there's nothing really to say. Valentina is the best flyweight we've had in the longest time. And of course, this is why Amanda Nunes has to step back into the conversation, because Amanda Nunes is coming out of her retirement to face Kayla Harrison for the bantamweight title in the women's divisions. But of course, there is room to make her go down to fight Valentina Shevchenko, because it seems like Amanda Nunes is the only answer to some of these boogie women in the women's division. We don't have the same level here, and we just were not aware that Valentina was that good compared to someone like Weili Zhang. I thought she would meet her match on Saturday night, and she certainly didn't. Total strikes for Valentina Shevchenko, 137 strikes, and out of those 137 we got 41 significant strikes, and she got 5 out of 6 of the takedowns that she attempted, compared to, of course, Weili Zhang attempting 1 takedown, getting 0 and landing 32 significant strikes and 80 strikes overall. Total domination, nothing to say. Valentina needs to be stopped. I love Valentina Shevchenko. I think she's great. Valentina, congratulations for your new emerald on your belt, if there is any place for that emerald on your belt. You have defended this belt so many times and nowhere near retirement, I don't think. But at 37 years old, she's still on the top of her game. And last but not least, we of course had Jack Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev, former UFC lightweight champion, coming up to welterweight to challenge for the belt against the former UFC welterweight champion Jack Della. And unfortunately, it didn't go Jack's way, and Islam Makhachev, as I predicted, did not lose this fight at all. And I was saying it all week, it was impossible that Islam was going to lose this fight. Of course, I saw the risk that Jack Della presented to Islam. Of course, he's a great striker, he's a stud, and he hits hard. But against someone like Islam Makhachev, there's just no way of winning this fight. I'm sorry. There was just no way. He, of course, landed 140 strikes and 30 significant strikes to Jack Della's 18 significant strikes. That is coming from a striker, guys. That is crazy stats. But of course, that is explained perfectly well by the fact that Islam Makhachev took Jack Della down in all 5 rounds and didn't let it up. Didn't let up at all and got those takedowns. 4 out of 4 takedowns were landed, and he was able to dominate from A to Z. I think this is another Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus du Plessis situation, but the difference here is that Jack Della Maddalena is a striker. He's not a grappler at heart, whereas Dricus du Plessis was a self-proclaimed grappler. For Jack Della Maddalena, what we can congratulate him on is the fact that he didn't get submitted, which is very impressive considering that Islam has submitted so many of his opponents in the past and also KO'd his opponents. I think Islam said to himself, I can't KO the master of striking himself, Jack Della Maddalena, so I'm going to have to do other things. So he had a game plan in place, and he put in place his game plan to work and didn't let up. And unfortunately for Jack seemed so overwhelmed. After the first round, you could tell he was almost wanting to cry. He had the most horrible look on his face because he knew he was going to lose his belt that night. I think after the first round, he knew already that my belt is no longer mine. He is fallen into the slump of, for example, Belal Muhammad, who had his belt just before him. Belal got the belt and lost the belt. There were no title defenses. First title defense did not go his way. And that's the same thing that happens to Jack. And I think that, as I said earlier on, I think we need a good grappler like Sean Brady to come in and grapple with Islam Makhachev. Until we get someone like that, there will be no stopping Islam Makhachev, nor will there be stopping Khamzat Chimaev. And I can't wait to see someone who can stop these guys, even though I like these fighters. I can't wait to see them meet their match. And I hope Islam Makhachev doesn't retire before he meets his match. That would be a shame. What's next for Islam Makhachev? But of course, that's the question that UFC has to answer. I think Michael Morales would be a great opponent for Islam Makhachev just because he's on the top of this division and he is dominating every one of his opponents. So if someone were to stop Islam Makhachev in his tracks, that could be Michael Morales. If someone were to stop Michael Morales in his tracks, that could be Islam Makhachev. So I think they could both beat their matches on that night. And if this fight does happen one day, then I would love to see it. But of course, the fight that everyone is looking for is Ilia Topuria versus Islam. And now that Islam is the welterweight champion, Ilia is going to have to move up from lightweight to welterweight. And that's probably not a problem for Ilia and definitely not a problem for Islam. So I think for a super fight, we may get to see that fight in the early months of next year or at the White House. But until then, of course, we have lots of new welterweight contenders, a lot of people changing positions in the rankings. I cannot wait to see what the rankings are going to look like when they're updated after Saturday night's action. And I can't wait to see what fights are booked after all this crazy action. I'll be doing some polls on my page about the fights, what you'd like to see next. I'd love to see your guys' opinions. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on the whole card for UFC 322. And I'll be back in a couple of days for a podcast episode. And also I'll be back with a video about UFC Qatar. Of course, we're going to be going over that card. I cannot wait. I'll be seeing you guys later. Have a nice week. Bye.